We don't normally get together on a Saturday to have a St. Mark's Spark, but in the midst of everything going on in our country right now, in the midst of so much pain, I thought it would be appropriate to talk. In fact, it would be negligent not to speak about what's going on in our world and also the question of what is our response in the midst of so many things that are going on. I wrote this out before, and so I'm going to read it right now, but I'm also including it in this message, and hopefully it'll provide some level of comfort, but also some level of encouragement to get involved where we see so much pain. One of the problems of recording services on Thursday is we don't really get the chance to respond to what's going on between Thursday evening, Friday, Saturday, and early Sunday morning. Normally, it's not a problem. Normally, whatever we're saying is appropriate, and certainly what Pastor MP is preaching on tomorrow for the Pentecost Sunday service is appropriate. But there is a potential, though, when we record the services for the need of technology to make sure that the services are delivered smoothly, that they might feel stale at best and perhaps out of touch with reality and what's going on in the world at worst. And the thing I will say is, I don't know right now what the solutions are. This conversation is not supposed to be some watershed moment where it's all peace, love, and understanding afterwards, but it's also something, a reminder that we can't be silent. It's not a time to be silent as followers of Christ. And I've kept thinking about the phrase, the problem of pain. I've been thinking a lot about the pain that people are going through right now in our country. And C.S. Lewis writes the book, The Problem of Pain. And in this, he discusses the relationship between the pain we feel and God, between suffering and God. If God is all powerful, if God is all knowing, if God is everywhere, then why is there so much pain? And there's one section of the book that stood out to me I'm going to share with you today. And what Lewis writes is, mental pain is less dramatic than physical pain, but it is more common and more hard to bear. The frequent attempt to conceal mental pain increases the burden. I'm going to say that again. The frequent attempt to conceal mental pain increases the burden. It is easier to say, my tooth is aching, than to say, my heart is broken. And here's the thing about physical pain, it's easy to identify, it's easy to work on correcting. That's physical pain. Mental pain is much trickier. It's not always visible, and it's not always present that we can see, and it's far easier to dismiss. In the past few days, we have seen a lot of both physical pain, of mental pain, and frankly, spiritual pain as well. So, what do we do with the problem of pain that we see so prevalent and so active and in so many ways just bubbling up over the surface right now in our world? The first thing I think that's appropriate is we have to be honest with how we have viewed it, how we have, we need to analyze the ways that we've contributed to it, the ways that we have ignored it, and also the times that we've condemned any response to alleviate it. Now, this is hard because this is about looking inside of our own lives, looking at these ways and being honest and saying, there are things that I have done, there are things that I have left undone, there are things that go on in the larger society that have benefited me, but have caused pain to brothers and sisters. It's hard, but that's why we begin. One of the first things we do when we gather together for worship is we have a prayer of confession. That we go and we say, these are the things individually I have done, but also these are the things collectively that we have done or left undone that have caused pain to other people. Confession is hard, but it is essential. And the protests of the last several days have followed an all too familiar pattern. The morning, during the daylight, they are peaceful and many times dangerous in the night. There are many similarities that we see into the demonstrations that occurred in Ferguson several years ago. And I'll just say this, I hate violence, and I hate to see looting, but I also realize this is a reaction to pain, a mental pain that is not often seen, and I don't often see this mental pain in my immediate neighborhood. A pain I do not feel as much as I should for others who are going through it, and also, frankly, a pain that I am quick to dismiss. I agree, these actions and what's going on, it's troubling, and they should be troubling, but they are not the disease here. They are a symptom of that pain and that oppression. Let me explain a little bit what I'm talking about, how I see it from my perspective. For too long, many have been comfortable, maybe myself as well, with dismissively saying something to the effect of, that's just the black man's burden. That's just something they have to bear. Whether it's the neighborhood they live in, the lack of opportunity, the lack of healthy food choices, the environmental degradation that we cause and have been caused in those neighborhoods, in those areas. We might even dismissively say something along the lines of, if they don't like it, why don't they leave? And listen, I say this recognizing I've had just about every advantage one could ask for in life. From my gender to my nationality to my skin color to my sexuality to being raised in a family who valued education and also had the means to provide it. I recognize, I've said this before, I was born on second base. I did not hit a double. And when I look at myself and I look at so many other people, I see that anger because many people in our community are angry because they don't even have the right equipment to get into the batter's box, to be a part of that game. If it's the American dream, whatever we want to call it, there is a deep mental and spiritual pain that is being felt by many in our nation. And perhaps if you're a member of St. Mark, or maybe you saw my Facebook post last night, I wrote in the June newsletter a little bit about this, but I read that and I realized I did not speak enough, and that's one of the causes, the motivations to do something here on Saturday. But what I did talk about, I think is still important. It is about seeing our neighbors, not just as neighbors, but also as family. And I gave the illustration of the young girl who was carrying her little brother, younger sibling, and somebody tries to help her, and she says, "He ain't heavy, he's my brother." You might remember the Holly song that was sung that was based off of that illustration. We've talked about neighbors a lot and what it means to be in a neighborhood a lot during my time here at St. Mark. And I think it is just about the most essential concept, the most essential thing in Christian living to grasp, to accept, and frankly to live out. And the hardest part is to live it out. One thing I fear about this neighbor talk is, and when I do this, in the inevitable corresponding Mr. Rogers illustration, whom I love, Mr. Rogers, and this is in no way to speak against him, but sometimes it's become so sanitized, and it can feel too amorphous, and we really question who is my neighbor, and we don't come up with a satisfactory answer. And I recognize probably in my own life, in my own ministry, I'm playing it too safe. When the question is asked, who is my neighbor, we have to be bold today in saying it's the black and brown people in Minneapolis, in Louisville, in Georgia, and here in St. Louis as well. It's not enough just to not to be a racist. We have to be more than that. Brian Stephen talked about this in this book, Just Mercy, and I've talked a lot about this book because it's made such an impact on myself and I know in our church as well. It's not enough not to throw stones. We have to be stone catchers, and that requires active engagement with those who would harm our neighbors, those who would hurt our brothers and sisters. Jesus was a stone catcher. Literally, he was a stone catcher. He stood in the gap between the woman who was caught in adultery and the men who were dead set on taking her life. Jesus was a stone catcher, and to follow him faithfully means we have to go and do likewise. That we have to go and stand in those gaps and catch those stones. Paulo Freire says it even better. I've shared this with you all before, I know, and my mom had a framed picture of this quote growing up in her house. Washing one's hands of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless means to side with the powerful, not to remain neutral. Meaning that if we say it doesn't concern me, it's not my burden. If we wash our hands between this conflict between those who have power and those who do not, it is not being neutral. It is siding with the status quo. It is siding with those who are powerful in many ways, who are doing harm to our brothers and sisters. We cannot be neutral in the midst of so much pain. We cannot sit on the sidelines and say it does not involve me. We cannot criticize the crowds without first learning and hearing about their suffering. Now, it was there long before this pandemic. It was there long before George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, or Ahmaud Arbery was murdered in Georgia, or Breonna Taylor was shot dead in Louisville, or any of the other countless acts of violence and death to black and brown neighbors across our country, around our country, and across our nation's history. Pain will always demand a response. We might be tempted to say, it's not my pain, but we'd be wrong. We'd be wrong to say, this is not my pain, especially if we take the Bible seriously. Take the Bible seriously. The Apostle Paul describes the church as a body. There are different parts with different purposes, but each individual has a role to play to build up the whole. And what the Apostle Paul writes, he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 26, if one member suffers, all suffer together with it. If one is honored, all rejoice together. When we start seeing our neighbors, and we start seeing everyone as our neighbors, and we start seeing their pain, it's not just the pain of an individual, it's the pain of a part of a body. It's a pain that we feel. If I stub my toe, my body, whole parts of it hurts. If there is violence and there is injustice, and if there is pain in one part of our body, the people around us, then we should all feel it if we take the Bible seriously. And I don't have the answers. I don't have all the answers for you, for myself, for my family, but I know it's not enough just to be silent. I do know that there is an undeniable truth from 20 years of serving as a pastor, that when someone is hurting, when someone is sick, when someone is crying out, there might not be the right words to say, but there is always the right place to be. There might not be the right words to say, but there is always the right place to be. And we must stand beside, sit with, comfort those whose mental and physical and spiritual pain has become unbearable. I'm wrapping up. I know I've shared the story, the story of Reverend Eugene Carson Blake in the past with many of you. He was very active in the Presbyterian Church and the World Council of Churches, and he was also very active in the civil rights movement, in that he gave one of the speeches from the Lincoln Memorial on the March on Washington, and he shared these words, but these words are also, frankly, these words are a confession as well. He said, we come to the march behind and with these amazingly able leaders of the African American community, who, to the shame of almost every white American, have alone and without us mirrored the sufferings of the cross of Jesus Christ. They have offered their body to arrest and violence, to the hurt and the indignity of fire hoses and dogs, of derision and poverty, and some to death for this just cause. We come. Late we come. But we come to present ourselves, our souls, and our bodies to be a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is our reasonable service. I don't know what the right response is, but I know as followers of Christ that we need to have a righteous response. And it's not too late, even if it is late. Late we come, to quote Reverend Blake. It's not too late, especially when the cries of pain are so loud around us. It's not too late, especially when we realize we are connected as one body, and when one body part is hurting, the whole body is hurting. It's not too late to stand in the gap and start catching stones. I pray that you stay up to date with what is going on in our larger community, in the larger nation, the larger world. I pray that God will move in your heart and our hearts collectively to feel this emotional, mental, spiritual pain of so many brothers and sisters. And I pray that God will give each and every one of us individually the strength to act, and collectively the will to work against these times and these situations of injustice. May God be with you all.